He is a man who comes across as a very decent, very upstanding human being with a great deal of integrity. And so I do find it kind of slightly strange that, he is being accused of running a sort of Downing Street with that kind of flavour. But, if you look at what's been going on around the kind of Morgan McSweeney briefings, it's hard to disagree that most of the victims of that, certainly
women.
Have been women, whether it be Bridget Phillips and whether it be Lisa Nandy.
But now, let's get up to the minute analysis on the key political stories of the week. Caroline Wheeler joins me. She is political editor of the Sunday Times. Thanks so much for coming in, Caroline. Nice to see you. Now, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has been speaking this morning to the Munich Security Conference. Here's a flavour of what he said.
Now, we are not the Britain of the Brexit years anymore, because we know... And that is because we know that in a dangerous world, we would not take control by turning inward. We would surrender it. And I won't let that happen.
Well, there you are. That was a man called Keir Starmer speaking to the Munich Security Conference. And Caroline, he's back on safe territory here, isn't he?
Yes, he is. I'm sure that he's delighted to not be talking about the internal turmoil that's been going on within his own party and to be talking about foreign affairs. I mean, as we have discussed many times before, there are plenty of Labour MPs that think Sir Keir Starmer would be a much better foreign secretary than he would be Prime Minister. And so appearing at the Munich Security Conference at this point where he's got a little bit of breathing space after what has been a tumultuous week for him, it's probably an enormous relief that it's come up at this point where he can talk to the world, to look like a statesman, to play on the fact that he has a good relationship with the United States and a good relationship with Donald Trump, all the things that he wants to be saying to his internal critics about why he should remain the Prime Minister.
The problem, as I see it, listening, and I've listened to snatches of what he's been saying at Munich, is that there's not much new there. We must stand firm in Europe, and we have to defend ourselves. We need to up our game a little bit. So it's all very familiar, isn't it?
It is. And, I think the message that the Prime Minister has been trying to deliver now for several weeks is all about the need for close relationships, both with Europe, the United States and indeed China. It's not so long ago that he came back from China. But I'd say the thing that's kind of different about this Munich Security Conference in comparison to previous years is that kind of love-in that they seem to be having with the United States at the moment. That speech that was given by Rubio was in stark contrast to what we heard from JD Vance, was much more conciliatory towards the fact that, the US and Europe should be sort of best buddies, basically, and that there's nothing to see here, which, there's been a lot of tension between that relationship for a long period of time, starting at the beginning of the year with Venezuela. The discussions about Greenland in particular have created those tensions, and it seems that Rubio is trying to sort of smooth those waters a little bit.
It does, doesn't it? But it's also possibly the case that there's a difference of opinion within the Trump White House about Europe.
Good cop, bad cop.
Good cop, bad cop. Yes, exactly. Has the Matthew Doyle stuff gone away?
I think probably briefly. I think we're just in this kind of really strange kind of void at the moment, which is that we've got a 1-week parliamentary recess, which the government kind of limped towards. But I think that whilst the House of Commons will be silent for the next sort of 7 days, I think the questions around the Prime Minister's judgment and integrity are not going to go away. And this particular scandal goes right to the very heart of his judgment. And
does it? Because, when I first heard this, and I'm as much a man for a scandal as the next man, it struck me as not being anywhere near on the level of the Peter Mandelson business, for example.
It's actually interesting that you say that, because I've spoken to a number of MPs, and indeed I've spoken to Kemi Badenoch for this week's newspaper.
Right.
And not just, you would say that, wouldn't you? It's an attack line from the Conservatives, but I have been hearing it also from very loyal Labour MPs. They actually say it's worse.
Oh, really?
Because this was a situation, this was a decision This was a scam that was right under their nostrils. You know, they didn't appoint Peter Mandelson to the House of Lords. That was something that was done prior to their time. You know, but this was something where Sir Keir Starmer read in the Sunday Times, or would have read in the Sunday Times, or certainly his aides would have read in the Sunday Times, that there was an issue to do with the convicted paedophile, which Matthew Doyle had remained in contact with beyond the charges being brought around child sexual images. And he still went ahead with that appointment. Now, you know, it's a whole kind of question of process here, you know, but as far as I understand it, up to the very moment that person is ennobled, so when they take their ermine robes and they go into that chamber and they get their patents and all of those kind of things, the process can be stopped. And indeed, somebody told me yesterday that there had been a situation with the Conservative Party some time ago where they had put forward a candidate, that it had been announced that they'd put forward that candidate, they'd gone through a lot of the process, and then at the very last moment something came up and they withdrew their offer of a peerage to them. So there is precedent for this happening, but on this particular occasion it didn't. Matthew Doyle became a peer, and you know, that is the source of all the trouble for Sir Keir Starmer at the moment, because it looks very similar to what happened in the Peter Mandelson case, where he was warned that there were issues and he chose to ignore it.
Oh, right, that's interesting. He will have been grateful, Sir Keir, for the arrival on the scene of Sir Jim Ratcliffe midweek, which again allowed him to bask in his more comfortable territory of being anti-racist, as he would put it, and unifying.
Yeah, but I think that's right. I mean, look, you know, when people say sort of things that are controversial, you know, Prime Ministers don't often get involved. You know, that's something for you over there. You know,
Should
this is
he
not
have got
somebody
involved?
in his world.
Should he?
Well, I think it speaks to the sort of area, as you were quite rightly saying, the arena that he feels most comfortable in, which is kind of righteous indignation about when people say unfortunate things. I mean, let's not forget that Sir Keir Starmer himself, you know, has said things which his critics have pointed to. The Island of Strangers speech is what I'm talking about there, and was pulled up on that by members of his own party. But, you know, it is a strange situation where you have people in the kind of cultural hinterland who are saying things that then suddenly become a political story. And I think there is a lot of sort of barnacles being scraped off the boat at the moment, definite distraction politics going on in an attempt to kind of detract from what is going on within the Labour Party, which is, I mean, I can barely believe that we're saying this, but there was a attempted coup last week to remove the Prime Minister, where a very senior figure in the Labour Party, I'm talking about Anna Sarwar, went over the top and called for his resignation, something that I feel like everyone's been kind of building up to for some time. It happened, it dissipated, and I think the government will be very pleased to be talking about anything but that.
Yeah, there's still a kind of monstrous legion of greatly transgressed women in the Labour Party who do not like, possibly Sir Keir Starmer's policies and the way he's running the country, but particularly don't like what they are calling a boys' club. Harriet Harman said it, Rosie Duffield said it to me years ago, you know. Is this a big problem for him?
I think it has been. I think, you know, you can see now that he's trying to change the party, and if you look at all the appointments that he's made in the past week, they all seem to have been women, up to and including, you know, the claims that we're going to have a new cabinet secretary, the first woman to ever do that job, with Antonio Romeo. But I think that there has been a perception that he has been listening to voices who have been quite exclusional towards women. And I think that people like Lisa Nandy have pointed to the fact that there have been these briefings which have been, as she said, dripping with misogyny. It's difficult to reconcile that with the Keir Starmer that I know.
Sure.
You know, if you know, it is true what many people say about Keir Starmer. He is a man who comes across as a very decent, very upstanding human being with a great deal of integrity. And so I do find it kind of slightly strange that, you know, he is being accused of running a sort of Downing Street with that kind of flavour. But, you know, if you look at what's been going on around the kind of Morgan McSweeney briefings, it's hard to disagree that most of the victims of that, certainly
women.
have been women, whether it be Bridget Phillips and whether it be Lisa Nandy.
Not the first time for a Labour administration, is it?
No.
We had the same stuff with Tony Blair, didn't we?
Yeah.
Cabinet by...
Well, and, you know, you only have to look at the fact that we have never had a female party leader
No.
for the Labour Party, despite the fact that we have had several now with the Conservative Party. And that is something that, lots of people in the Labour Party point to and just question what on earth's going on.
Well, indeed. And at last, Bridget Phillipson, she has delivered some form of guidance to schools very late in the day, nearly a year now since the Supreme Court decision, April the 16th, 2025, which takes us, it looked to me, excuse me, that we were 90% of the way back towards a sort of sanity. But she has allowed teachers to make decisions on social transitioning. Might this come back to bite them?
Well, I think it's a really interesting question and not clear yet, because I think that we are sort of at the early days of this kind of thing happening. It goes on in schools. It's probably been going on in schools for a long time, but nobody's been putting out sort of formal guidance on it. So it's hard to know how it's going to land. But look, there is a bit of wiggle room here, I feel. I'm not sure that parents looking at the guidance would be entirely clear where they stand. It seems to be that they're saying that the vast majority of parents should be involved in those questions about whether their children are allowed to social transition. And, in the most case, teachers shouldn't facilitate it, but look for further support for them. It looks a bit fudgy to me.
It does, doesn't it?
Which is why I think it's difficult to assess whether it's going to come and bite them, because, there's plenty of ways to work around it. And I think that's been done deliberately so, because I know that when they were drawing up this guidance, they were very concerned about the kind of legal implications it could have, with all sorts of lawsuits coming off the back of it, and how that guidance would be interpreted. So I think they've written it in a deliberately loose way. But I personally, looking at it, if I were a teacher and indeed as a parent, I'd still be a little bit confused.
Well, yes, but presumably they also had the teacher unions and the teachers themselves in mind as well when they left it a little bit loose.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Caroline Wheeler, thanks ever so much for coming in. You can read more from Caroline in the Sunday Times tomorrow, or with a digital subscription at thetimes.com, and listen to her, please, every week on the State of It podcast.